Welcome to Leading the Way podcast, where you'll learn neuroscience-backed ways to lead more effectively and have more fun at work with what you already have. Hey there, it's Chris, and welcome to Leading the Way. So excited to have you with us, audience, and awesome guest. Christopher Farnath is with us today. Christopher, thank you so much for being on the show.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I want to tell folks a little bit about you. You know about you, I know about you, but they don't know yet. So, Christopher runs a very interesting practice called Service Instinct, and he works with tech leaders to help them unlock the door to their career success. He's once been described as ferociously ambitious. I love that. And Chris achieves a lot of things through the mantra that he has of be stubborn about your goals, but flexible about your methodologies. He's the author of one book that's released and one that's about to release. And we're just excited and delighted to have you with us today, Christopher. Thanks for being on.
That's great. No, really appreciate it, Chris.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. So jumping right in, lots going on in the world, but lots going on in the tech world and tech leadership world. Are there trends you are seeing as we record going into fall of 2024 for leaders in the tech space?
Absolutely. I think this is as a result of COVID. We're still seeing a major reaction to that. And so the workplace is completely transformed. You've got a lot more remote workers that exist. So being able to cope with leadership in a remote world is probably the biggest thing, with probably AI and how that can be deployed and utilized as a sort of coming up closely behind. So I genuinely see that leaders have had a massive transformation. They're obviously, all working obviously from home, and they now have these widely dispersed teams, which
Right.
requires a totally different set of skills to be able to ensure that the message that you're saying is actually being received and understood.
Mm,
I'd say
mm.
those probably the two big ones. There are many other things which, ubiquitous problems that people have in terms of engagement, and organizations like Gallup do great surveys to show that engagement in an organization is really horrifically low,
It sure is.
particularly with those who are disengaged and those even worse who are actively disengaged. So
Right.
it's significant. So the challenge for the leader is a massive thing at the moment, and
Yes.
there's a lot of energy, a lot of interest, in terms of how you A, attract the right people, and B, how you ensure that they are retained and have a career that's really clear to them. And that's been my speciality.
Nice. No, I mean the trends that people of my age, Gen X, grew up with were, that hustle and grind and just work harder and somehow everything will work out. We're finding that's a little less than true, certainly as careers progress, but as the world is changing, and I know you coach a lot of leaders, tech leaders in this space. What transitions do you recommend that they move from? We still have to work, still have to put energy in. We're not saying not do that, but is there a mindset shift for success for these types of leaders?
I think the first thing is if you're in a business, you've got to understand that you're delivering an outcome for a business. So there's a
Mm,
particular rationale for existence there, and that could be if you're in a commercial business. PE is a massive world where I've worked. So you have a duty to deliver certain commercial results. So that's something that you've got to always have sitting in the back of your mind as a leader. How are you going to make whatever you do, excuse me, commercially viable and something that is particularly profitable?
mm,
But there is then the overlay, which I think has certainly become a particularly interesting mix with you mentioned the generations, the millennials and the next generation that comes from that. They are more about the person. They're more about the individual. There's a lot more expression around that, and there's a lot more, in particular, to do with DEI, to ensure that you've got the representation from a wide variety of different experiences. And sometimes, and it's interesting because you can see how that could be in conflict with some of the organizational desires and those sort of commercial aspirations. But as a, back to your question, you have to do the grind. You
Hmm.
always have to do the grind. There's absolutely be focus driven and understand your targets. And I think just staying stubborn to your goals, but flexible about your methodologies, which I was delighted to hear you quote, because that really brings out the attitude that really has to be sort of driven through leadership to be
Hmm.
able to achieve that. Because I always find when you're dealing with someone who doesn't have the right attitude for dealing with that, then everything is a problem. And you see a different way of reacting to things. And Mike Tyson's phrase, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Right.
Uh, it really does stand out when you are seeing things hit you from every side to actually take you, if you're not able to be flexible when and to deal with that, your ability to hit the overall goal is going to be more challenging.
Right. Right. That's so well said. You know, looking at the trends and the data that we see, the economy is we've got some slowdown going on. We've got high inflation rates, a number of factors, but these things happen in waves. So the other side of that, after these layoffs, is we're going to have a lot of hiring going on, right? As companies probably overdid their layoffs. Now we're going to flip the script, and so from being a market for employers, it's about to flip to be, I believe, in the next 6, 12 months to be a market for those hiring. And I know your first book, Champion Hires, is all about, I believe you call it spectacular recruitment. What got you motivated to put that book out there in the world?
Thank you. Yes, it was something that was the origin story of that came out from something that actually happened in 2008. So
Mm,
not relevant to the current sort of world, but actually is something that when I reflected back on it and sort of overlaying it in to today's terms, it was still something that really resonated. And that is, how do you make sure that you bring about the right people into your organization that
mm,
does two things. One, gets people into the roles that aren't just going to do what you ask in a job description, but are actually going to leverage their expertise, their interests, their desires, and start creating things that are over and above what you initially, perhaps as the hiring manager, initially wanted.
mm.
And if you think about, anybody who's listening to this sort of recording and thinks about the people in their group or the people in their organization who make a massive difference, do they really truly just do what it says in the job description? And the answer
Hopefully
will
not.
yeah, exactly.
Right?
Because we hire the attitude. I think that's certainly the thing. I was chatting to a lady who works very closely with people in medical writing, interestingly.
Mm,
And we discussed the point about, you hire the smile and train the skills,
mm.
because I thought that that was an interesting perception. Now, depending on the type of role that you're doing, you absolutely have to have gates that ensure that they can achieve the particular skills that you need.
Sure.
And if it's to do with anything to do with, life, preservation of life through medical situations, or if
Right.
it's something engineering to make whatever a structure it is, or transportation that requires you to build stuff that lasts and whatever, that protects life, you
Yeah.
absolutely want to make sure they can do that. There's no
Sure.
doubt about it. So the next piece is assuming that you've been through those gates and you've got those boxes checked, then it is, who do you bring in? And
Mm,
you've got, there's some great references to this, the unicorn, the 12 characteristics of the unicorn. What makes somebody stand out over and above their particular, immediate set of skills?
right.
So when I actually sort of put this book together, I was, with having hired hundreds and hundreds of people into my various organizations in 20 odd years, my thought was, okay, so I'm still seeing so many of these sort of like post a note on Indeed or on a LinkedIn or something like that. And then this tsunami. In fact, my second chapter is called the Tsunami Challenge. Once you post something, you get this absolutely weird scenario with people who are probably been out of work for some time,
Mm.
have lost the motivation or lost their mojo, and they just sort of getting to that point where, look, I'll apply for everything, and
Yeah.
I'll just hope that one of these will just strike lucky. And they go online and they click the button, and they submit their application, and off it goes. And you end up with, as a hiring manager, hundreds of applications
Right.
that are completely and utterly inappropriate
Right.
because they don't have the skills, they're not in the, they're the right languages, they don't have the right capabilities, they haven't done any of the reading, they don't even read what the job does, and they just
Right.
apply blankly.
Right.
So you have to deal with that. So chapter one in the book is more about what is it you need to think about if you go out and proactively seek out these people, because
Mm.
that's strengthening your champion magnet. The second one is, okay, we recognize also that you can't do that for everything, and there are some roles which do need to be posted. So
Sure.
you need to actually have the sort of reality check is, okay, so now you've done that, expect this. And if you expect that, what is it that you should be doing? And I question in there the sort of strategies that you can use to select out. You
Mm.
can put in some principles, for example, with regards to, do you just immediately dismiss anybody that didn't send a covering letter?
Hmm.
Example. That's a classic one that people will do. Um, but actually, you can miss out a huge amount of really talented people who
Right.
who've been coached that don't waste your time with a covering letter.
Right.
So, but the question is what level of selection do you do?
Mm.
Um, I always remember back to do you remember The Office,
Yes,
the
of course. Yeah.
comedy? So in the UK with Ricky Gervais, he has this great thing with The Office. He just picks up the top half of the CVs that he's received and he chucks them in the bin. And he says, "I don't hire unlucky people." And I thought that's a really interesting way of and humorous way of just dismissing a huge chunk so that he just focuses on a
Yes.
different part. But the reality is you then bring in AI, you then bring in the ability to select. But is that the right strategy? You got to be very careful. And then I have to
Absolutely.
go through the rest of the process in the book to talk through what you do once you go through that filtering and right the way through to actually finding the champion, performing the champion hire workshop, which I think is the magic, and that's the piece in the book, which a was the origin of it in terms
Mm.
of performing this fantastic champion hire workshop in China in 2008 to hire this unbelievable sort of challenge,
Yeah.
which was I got to recruit 21 people into our new flagship um, call center in
Mm.
China. It was in the Olympic year,
Wow.
so it was a fantastic opportunity for me to go and visit a lovely country.
Sure.
And we had to recruit. All of them had to speak English and Chinese. That was the first requirement. They
Wow.
all had to be obviously in the customer service world, so they have to have those skills.
Yep.
Seven of those 21 had to speak English, Chinese, and Japanese, and seven of them had to speak English, Chinese, and Korean.
Wow.
So, in terms of the challenge that I had to ensure that we got the right people with all these characteristics and these checkboxes done, I was tasked to go out and do this with my process of the champion hire workshop.
Wow.
And to cut to the chase, we did it.
Sure.
Uh,
Wow.
but the story in itself is quite a scary thing for me because the
Yeah.
day before we flew, I was also given the extra challenge that I couldn't take the team that I'd worked with to prepare this
Oh.
because of cost savings because we were going
Wow.
that brought in a new dimension, and I was
Wow.
the people that you need to work with and therefore brief with a day to go are all these people. There were salespeople, the regional sales people. My boss turned up as well, and a variety of other local staff that we had.
Right.
And I have to say that it was interesting because it was on the 14th of July, the first day when we
Okay.
did the presentation, and I in my head had it because in France 14th of July is Bastille Day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I thought I'm either going to be the guy that they execute
Right.
or the guy that succeeds. And without doubt, we just came to it, and it just that whole process manifested, and we delivered. And a week and a half later, when I sat in the airport with my boss, he was just like, "I can't believe that's just happened."
Wow.
We battered it out of the park. And then the following 6 months after that, we staffed with and did rotation between the UK and China, to make sure that we had really qualified people who knew everything to be there as well, just to make sure that that transition worked. And that sort of forms the sort of 90-day onboarding piece as well. So really interesting. That's why the book came about.
Yeah, wow, what a powerful story. And it's one thing to hire in your native country, native tongue. There's a lot of things jokingly I would say we could be sloppy about, right? But when it's
Oh, yeah.
time zones and cultures away and it's a very different world. I've had teams as well, and in my case in Noida, India, and in Ireland, and you do the follow the sun model, and yes doesn't always mean yes, and it means
That's right.
right. Sometimes it's out of politeness. They'll say, in a different culture, they'll say yes out of respect and politeness, but they don't really mean it, and so you have to navigate a lot of things to really understand. Not just
That,
the language, but the culture, and then very quickly storm norm form your vision of success.
mm.
That's a big
I mean,
one.
one of the key things, and you're absolutely right about the culture, was which I was brought up to speed with, literally as like hitting a brick wall, was the regional sales leader for Japan was very hesitant to have a call center in Dalian in China,
Mm,
which, by the way, there's a lot of history between that
yes,
particular location and Japan.
yes,
Um, and he was saying that a Chinese person ringing into Japan, there's still going to be cultural norms that are not quite right. And he
right.
said, unless they sound authentically Japanese, I really, he said, I really struggle to see you be successful in this venture, as if it was my
Mm.
suggestion that we were going to do this. So like you can only do, I said, well, look, I'd like you to interview every single candidate that comes through our process to become confident that they sound authentically Japanese.
Mm.
So that if they're going to be one of the seven, you sign it off. I said, I won't hire them unless you do. And that I have to say, and this was, I mean, I'm not capable of speaking the languages. So even if I spent years there, I wouldn't know the nuances to be a
Right,
native in each of those dialects. And the
right.
same for Korea. So I needed that support from them. And but when I was listening to the candidates, the first thing that really struck me, and this was unbelievable about China, the tone and the language that the people that we interviewed had, speaking in any of the languages that they had, was an absolute art form.
Mm.
It was incredible. And I was absolutely blown away by the purity, the enunciation, the capability of them speaking in English. So I had this immediate overwhelming sort of, wow, it's like speaking to somebody in Oxford or Cambridge. It was
Wow.
unbelievably home counties type perfect accents. And when these same people were then put in front of the sales leaders for the Korean and the Japanese leaders, they had the same overwhelming. They're naturals. They
Mm.
they just sound like they're from downtown Tokyo, or they're downtown Seoul, wherever it is, and they
Sure.
were absolutely amazed by this capability. So I
Wow.
mean, my whole appreciation for the Chinese people just was, on that one factor alone was amazing, because they had that capability to be just so fluent and
Yeah, I
such
that is
perfection.
amazing. I'm like you. I know how to say hello, I'm a dumb American in many different languages. At least
Yeah.
try to be polite and honor where I am, but past that, I have a amazing reverence for folks that can speak multiple languages. And as you said, like that really important nuance of the dialect local, and it sounds like they're from there. And very often these roles are not necessarily high paying financial roles either. And to get that level of talent, that's amazing. That's
Mm.
amazing.
I
So,
must admit, with another country in that sort of region, it's not quite. It's the Philippines. I work
mm,
with quite
yes,
a lot of people. Did a lot of BPO work, hiring in teams in the Philippines, and there are parts of the Philippines that sound as if they're Native American.
yes,
They're, you know,
yes,
they're native Filipino, but they are
right.
so American sounding. It's incredible.
Yes. I've worked with those too, and then there's the time difference, right? They're answering their time zone of midnight like it's, early morning when the person's calling. It's
Mm,
amazing. So
yeah.
transitioning a little bit, I know your next book that's coming out very soon, later this year, is about raising the floor, not the ceiling, and the customer experience. And I think most of us could say that customer experience sometimes is really great at companies, and then there's this giant delta where it's, mediocre to not good at all. Like
Yeah.
the person's
It's
doing you a favor for showing up, kind of an attitude, right?
I had an interesting call just like that the other day, which was I'd phoned up an organization to do an activity that I'd done 5 years in a row, exactly
Mm.
the same thing. And when they said, no, you have to do this, and I said, oh, you've changed the process. And they went, no, we haven't. And I said, okay, well, it doesn't matter, I'll follow it, whatever. And then they proceeded to argue with me.
Oh boy.
I was thinking, right, I was going to engage them in something else, but I just decided this person isn't having a good day. I'm not going to
Right.
do anything further. So that's the consequence of not getting it right. Is what is the knock-on effect, and the fact I'm
Mm.
now telling you, and of course it's going to go out. I haven't said the name because I do think they're a fabulous organization. Um, so yes, the raise the floor, not the ceiling. This whole principle again has an origin story. And when I used to be responsible for um, customer support, particularly when I was in a big organization that delivered call centers,
Mm.
I'll say the name Aspect.
Oh,
So
sure.
Aspect were the inventors of the call center. In fact, Aspect call center is a brand name. It's
Mm.
become ubiquitous about the industry now,
Sure.
but it was actually call center was their brand. So the organization is now known as Alvaria, but the time I was there, it was Aspect.
Sure.
And we had all the financial, houses. They still do have a huge financial sector.
Hmm.
And of course, when you are dealing with finance, particularly big equity shares and all those sort of things, when they're trading, the transactions that each call brings is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there are,
Sure.
significant consequences when an organization has an outage. And so this is the origin story of the book and why it's so important to make the point is it was sort of around about 2004, 2005. Again, not current, but really important because it still remains current.
Yeah.
Um, and it'll be appropriate because of this one thing. England, of course, my country, I'm proud Brit. England had just won the World Cup rugby. Now we don't
Mm.
win World Cups that often, and we're still
Right.
moaning about it for years to go.
Right.
But the rugby we won, and Sir Clive Woodward, who got knighted as a result of getting the team winning, wrote an autobiography which was called Winning.
Mm.
And he had this fantastic chapter, and it talked about the team that makes the fewest mistakes wins the World Cup, which to
Interesting.
me resonated massively because I looked through, there's like 6 or 7 things in his chapter, really learning from mistakes, making sure you go through the process, making sure you make fewer mistakes, being, all these key steps that you go through.
Mm.
And that now in the background, I'm in my day job. I walk into the office sort of about 9 o'clock in the morning, and there'd been this issue that had been manifesting for probably an hour or so. And of course, by that stage, all the escalation points had kicked in, and I
Right.
got this. actually I got a pager. That's how long ago it
Yeah,
was.
remember those?
Saying there's this issue. Come on, get back on this. You need to be there. So I walked into the operations room, and the teams were all frantically trying to sort out this issue. And without saying the name of the customer, it was a significant customer that was having a problem.
Mhm.
So when we ended up dealing with this, the guys were confident, they knew, where they were at. And one of my bolder managers came up to me and said, "Don't worry, Christopher, this is it. We'll come in with our capes on, we'll raise the ceiling, we'll lift the bar. This customer will think we're great because pain's good after all." And I said, "Do you know what? That's true in some situations, but you're missing the point about this customer.
Yeah.
This is this amount of money," and we rattled it off. And I said, "They're not interested in us in raising the ceiling. They want us to raise the floor."
Mm.
And I said, and that book suddenly came back into my mind. The team that makes the fewest mistakes wins the World Cup.
Yeah.
So we need to make fewer mistakes. When it turned out that the root cause of this issue had been down to the fact that we hadn't taken off remote problem notifications before performing some maintenance activity, which when it kicked off, flooded the system
Right.
and brought the system down, we introduced the problem.
Mm.
With trying to do the right thing, no good deed goes unpunished.
Right.
We ended up with this problem. And
Ouch.
so, to actually then have the discipline of everybody suddenly realize, I said, raise the floor, not the ceiling.
Yeah.
And that became a mantra that we built into our business. So from my perspective, why I thought there is important to then talk about that. I mean, customer experiences, there's many, many books about it. There's many, many things that people talk around. There's
Hmm.
customer success, the ubiquitous process that now everybody believes in, that really was formed in 2005 by the world of Salesforce.
Hmm.
Uh,
Sure.
and and the fact that they were losing customers all the time, but they were bringing new ones in. They were churning an entire customer base in 12 months, which is crazy.
Right. It is crazy.
Customer success there to stop that. The principle of raising the floor is like, don't make the mistakes that causes the customer to leave.
Hmm.
Get it right. So my book then talks about this approach, which is understanding what it is that you need to do to eliminate the errors that you can bring in. What processes do you have to change? What double checking do you need to do? What systems do you have to be sure of? How do you put belts and braces on? That was the phrase that we always used, the belts and braces here,
Right.
to actually engage with and make sure that your systems and your processes are seamless, faultless, and robust.
Mm.
And there's not you just checking, but there is the check from somebody who has a different set of eyes, who isn't involved and close to too close to see can't see the wood for the trees.
Right.
They're slightly one step removed, a peer review to make sure that you're doing something, and then double checking, getting the customer involved in some of these things as well, make sure they're comfortable with it.
Right.
Um, but, and this was the next point, once you've got that right, and this is the crazy thing, once you've got it right and you're doing all this wonderful stuff and you never make a mistake, you go into the next phase,
Right.
which is you no longer are perceived to be of value to them.
Mm.
This, I think, actually customer success is the solution to many of the problems that existed. But if you think 2005,
Hmm.
that was when it started to originate. At that stage, customer support was the main revenue of most organizations. You had 50% of the revenue was already paid for in support.
Right.
So now you're into this world where you're no longer making mistakes. So actually, why does somebody need to pay so much?
Right.
So, so you then have to justify the value.
Right.
And customer success is a big part of that. But you have to go through quite a major set of steps to be able to truly demonstrate your value to a client. Because, an organization that's trying to deliver customer experience but they are faultless,
Hmm.
means that there are few engagement points that aren't, you know, you don't get the easy entry to go in and say, sorry for that, let's talk about something.
Right.
And actually,
Right.
there's a really interesting book called Pain is Good, um, which is an interesting perspective. I'm still on the shelf on that one in terms of, do I think it's worthwhile creating engagements
Hmm.
which demonstrate value by demonstrating pain if they don't do it. That's quite an
Mm.
interesting technique, but um, yeah, for me, it's not spectacular customer experience
Right.
if it involves pain in any way.
Right, right, right. And every industry is different. I'm sure there's some outlier out there where that makes obvious sense, but I'm with you. Just using fear and pain as a motivator has limited results. And you can kind of only use it once.
Exactly.
Right, or a few times, but not many. It's really
I
interesting you're talking about I was reflecting as you're talking about lack of mistakes in the customer experience world and that side where, you're in full production and the tech world, right, has this go fast and break things modality in development, right? And a lot of people think, no, you don't keep doing that in production land, right? Or with your customer experience. Very important to do that in experiment and get it right. But when you're in that customer experience space, it's a very different modality. I think people can miss that. That simple little nuance of,
it is.
right?
I think without doubt, I think Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I know it's going that's going back to the 60s, but it's still the principles still are valid in many things, in so much that there is a foundation which is basic physiological needs, and before you can get to any of the levels above to the
Right.
self-actualization of the pit, you have to make sure that's working. And the consequence of getting any of the steps below wrong is that whatever stage you're at crashes down to that
Over,
lowest
right.
common, and that's a tremendous sort of explanation of an organization in the software world,
Mm,
because you could invest a huge amount of money in having wonderful people who, and by the way, in my definition, the difference between customer support and customer success is, one is about availability and the other one is about ensuring the, I mean, it's about renewal
mhm,
ultimately,
mhm.
back to that commercial piece, but actually helping them adopt that product in their world. So the
Right.
specialist that knows the product is great in support. The specialist who knows how to apply the product is great in customer success.
Right.
So those are your sort of major differentiators. Having said that, if you have somebody coming in who's a customer success manager or director or whatever it is, that this real visionary of how to help that customer adopt the product, how to take them the advantage of it, how to benchmark it, how to see what is right for the organization that they're dealing with, and
Mm,
living and breathing that customer, and a high touch, particularly high tech touch customer success. That part doesn't work if the product doesn't do what it says on the tin.
right.
And
Right.
there's your problem. So an organization that requires you to have that focus, if they're not doing the basics right, will struggle to achieve it. And
Right.
even if they get great adoption because that process is slick and they've got contracts that say, by the way, you have to renew, and oh, by the way, here's some service credits that we've got because it didn't quite work out the way we wanted, but actually, you're renewing, because
Sure.
you have a 5-year non-revocable
Right.
agreement. We're only
Right.
in year two. So sorry about all that stuff. We still need, let's just forget about that and let's just go forward.
Right.
They will become the worst type of customer.
Oh, absolutely.
They tell everybody.
Right.
And I think it's the Institute of Customer Service in the UK that did some research into it, that one customer will complain to you and 36 will tell somebody else.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I've heard 22,
It's,
but I believe it being more too, for
yeah.
sure. And it's very sticky that once you have the experience of, I don't like this company, they were tough to deal with, even on a small thing, it takes a lot of effort to unstick that, just as humans, we keep these filters for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, it can take a long time and heroic efforts to turn that around. for sure. And you're right. There's a lot of these enterprise contracts when I was in corporate that were 3, 5 years, but when we were struggling with that vendor for whatever reason, we were looking for every reason to get out instead of every reason to engage more and try to make
Yeah.
it work, right? That's where our energy was. And you're
Yeah.
right. That's the worst kind of customer to have. I mean, they're paying you, but oof.
Yes, and they have long memories as well. And I've got
Yes.
an absolute horror story. I won't name names, but it was an organization I was with, and it was before my time there. So an early adopter of the product. That
Mm,
was perhaps the essence. The contract was well written, and for whatever reason, the customer had an outage.
mm,
And it had an outage that required the resolution to be a paid for resolution.
mm.
So that was fine. Or, in the calm light of day where there's no emotions running
Right.
whatsoever, you can have the conversation that says, by the way, that problem has been self-induced. You went through the training, your trained person did the wrong thing. It introduced this. It's out of scope of the agreement that we
Right.
have. We'll rectify it, and the payment is this, whatever. And back in the early days of this organization, they refused to restart the system until the payment had been made.
Oh boy.
So now, though, I mean, perfectly legitimately in their rights to do so,
Sure.
but the issue was it was on a Friday evening.
Oh,
Worst time, of course, they always happen on a Friday evening.
yes, they do. Or Saturday
And,
morning. Yep.
and none of the people who could raise the purchase order were in
Mm,
again until Monday morning.
mm,
And then the Monday morning process started. And then it took about 4 days, even on an expedited purchase order, to get that through. So there were
mm.
5 days of outage,
Ouch.
significant outage. It was a Sev 2, so it wasn't total outage, but
Right.
a portion of their system was unusable. Now,
Ouch.
this is the problem because then that customer remembered that.
Right.
And when I got engaged, probably 10 years later, surprisingly, this customer is still one of the, stayed with them. Because the product, by the way, was outstanding, the market leader, and it was the fundamental core stickiness. It was a mission critical part of their system, which made
Mm,
it worse if you think about what happened.
yes.
Um, they stayed with us, but they punished us in every opportunity that they got. And they gleefully did that.
Wow.
And it became known. And so I had to, put my sort of Kevlar jacket on before going
Right.
for a meeting with them because they would just be shooting and stabbing and taking every opportunity to get their pound of flesh because we put them through that situation. And that's what happens if you get it, you miss that. You go by the process and not by the empathy or the
Right.
understanding or the value.
Right.
Um, and so that's the horror story. And I've always learned that if there was ever a need to have it demonstrated,
Yeah.
that you deal with the problem.
Yep.
It may, and again, there's value, there's a whole range of other factors than just being black and white on this. But essentially, if you're dealing with business to business, this is a big contract and you've got a relationship that matters for multiple years, you
Right.
don't argue at the time of the highest emotion. You just get on and do it.
Right.
It's as simple as that. And
It,
then once the pressure's off, you're all calm, you've submitted your root cause report, you can demonstrate with evidence after the event they've had no outage because of it and whatever, and da 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 da.
right.
Then you can go and say, by the way, it is, I'm afraid, on this occasion, a bill.
Yeah. No, it's so
And
right. I'm as you're saying that, it's so interesting how we also remember someone that took care of us in the rough times too, right? This thing
yeah,
happened and something bad happened. And yeah, I've also had sales reps during outages when I was in corporate that would like offer to upsell me in the next support package. I'm like, this is the wrong time to do that.
yeah.
They may well be
It's,
right to your point, right? That absolutely we should engage in a higher sales thing. And I'm flat out down with customers down and the heat's on then too. You said so well that when we're under duress, we don't have our full functions to us. So don't expect that either, right? It's put the fire out and get, your mean time to resolution going
Yeah.
as quick as you can. No, that's great.
I mean,
Chris,
it plays to, sorry to cut in, but it plays to the one of the major factors about the champion hires,
yeah,
because emotional intelligence, there's a perfect example there. If you don't have the emotional intelligence to understand that that's not the right time, you're not the right person for that job.
right.
It's just select you out. You're not going to introduce that into the mix and create another problem for your executives who have to go in and deal with the mess afterwards.
They have enough already. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything trickles up. Christopher, folks that are very interested, clearly you're an expert and customer experience, customer support, and also tech leadership. How would they engage with you? How would they connect with you?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile is easy to get to, and it's the usual sort of www.linkedin.com/in/and then Chris Farnath, all one word. That will get you connected. And then my webpage is www.serviceinstinct.com. I have a number of other domains which I use for my book. So raisethefloorbook.com is also how you can subscribe to get early access to that book if you want.
Great.
So those are my methodologies for connecting.
Great, great. We'll have those in the show notes. So if you're on the treadmill or driving in the commute, please don't hurt yourself or anyone else. They'll be for you later. Christopher, thanks so much for being on Leading the Way. Before we close out, I do ask all of the lovely guests, what's something you're incredibly thankful or grateful about?
I think the emergence of AI has radically transformed my life. Being able to deliver so much more as a result of taking advantage of technology. And what I would say is, for those people who are worried about whether or not AI is going to replace you, it won't, but somebody using AI might. So bear that in mind. It's a really important point.
Nice. Well put. Christopher, thank you again for being on Leading the Way. And awesome listeners, thank you for listening in. Make sure to do all those magical things that algorithms like, including like and subscribe. And even more importantly, share this with a friend. Really appreciate that. We'll see you
Thank
next
you.
time.
Thank you for listening to Leading the Way podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss other great episodes like this one. And if you're ready for more in your workplace, be sure to go to aintent.com. You'll find lots of free tools, assessments, and ways to engage directly with us to get your own epic results. We'll see you there.